License, registration, and proof of insurance. Why were you stopped back at that diner lot?
My documents are in my wallet and glove box. May I reach for them, officer?
Go ahead.
Red and blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror on a quiet stretch of county road usually mean a simple speeding ticket or a broken taillight. But tonight, those lights were the beginning of a cascading failure of authority. By the time the dust settled on this cold stretch of asphalt, a decorated military officer would be in handcuffs, and a small town would be forced to pay a massive price for a law enforcement culture that treated assumptions as probable cause. The rain had just stopped, leaving the pavement of the diner parking lot slick and reflective under the buzzing, erratic glow of a single neon sign. Inside the vehicle, a dark blue SUV. The heater was clicking softly, blowing warm air against the chill of a late November evening. Behind the wheel sat Captain Marcus Hayes, a 32-year-old logistics officer stationed at a nearby Army base. Marcus was a man who lived his life by protocol, schedules, and a quiet, unassuming discipline. In the passenger seat was his younger brother, Julian, a civilian software developer who had flown in from the West Coast for a long weekend. They had just finished a late dinner at a local diner, the kind of establishment where the coffee always tastes slightly burnt and the faint clatter of ceramic plates against metal counters forms a steady, comforting background noise. Julian was leaning back, tapping absently on his phone. The soft blue light illuminating the faint condensation on the passenger window. Marcus was carefully navigating the SUV out of the gravel lot, the tires crunching loudly over loose stones before transitioning to the smooth, wet hum of the two-lane highway that led back toward the perimeter of the base. It was a quiet night, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. There were no other cars on the road, just the endless rows of tall pine trees lining the shoulder, standing like dark sentinels against the starless sky. A mile down the road, sitting in a darkened turnout obscured by the trees, was Chief of Police Thomas Barrett. Barrett was a 25-year veteran of local law enforcement, a man who had spent his entire career in this small jurisdiction that bordered the sprawling military installation. Over the decades, Barrett had developed a deeply ingrained, almost cynical view of the world passing through his town. To him, the base brought a constant, rotating transient population, young men with fast cars, out-of-state plates, and an unpredictability that set his teeth on edge. Barrett prided himself on his instincts. He believed that his gut feelings were what kept his community safe, often blurring the line between proactive policing and unwarranted suspicion. As Marcus's dark SUV rolled past the turnout, traveling exactly at the posted speed limit of 45 miles per hour, Barrett's eyes narrowed. He noted the out-of-state plates, the dark silhouette of the vehicle, and the fact that it was coming from the direction of a diner that had recently been the site of a minor vandalism incident. There was no specific bulletin for a dark SUV. There was no erratic driving, but Barrett felt a familiar itch, a subtle, unexamined bias that whispered to him that something about these two men in this specific car did not belong here. Inside the SUV, Julian was mid-sentence, talking about a coding project, when the interior of the cabin was suddenly bathed in a strobing, blinding mix of red and blue light. The reflection bounced off the rearview mirror, casting harsh shadows across Marcus's face. The suddenness of it caused Julian to stop speaking instantly, a heavy, uncomfortable silence filling the space left by his voice. Marcus didn't panic. He checked his speedometer, 45 on the dot. He checked his mirrors. He signaled his intention, gently applying the brakes, and guided the heavy vehicle onto the muddy shoulder of the road. The tires hissed against the wet gravel as they came to a complete stop. Marcus shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and immediately rolled down all four windows, a habit drilled into him to ensure total transparency during traffic stops. He placed his hands firmly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions. The wind whipped through the open windows, carrying the sharp, cold scent of wet pine needles and damp earth. In the side mirror, Marcus watched the silhouette of the police officer step out of the cruiser. The heavy thud of the cruiser door closing echoed in the quiet night, followed by the slow, deliberate crunch of heavy boots approaching the driver's side. Chief Barrett walked with the heavy, unhurried gait of a man entirely comfortable with his authority. He held a heavy maglite in his left hand, sweeping the intense white beam across the back seat, then over the center console, and finally resting it squarely on Marcus's face. The light was blinding, forcing Marcus to squint and turn his head slightly away. Evening. Officer, Marcus said, his voice calm, measured, and entirely devoid of hostility. License, a registration, and proof of insurance. Barrett commanded, his tone flat and unyielding, offering no greeting or explanation for the stop. Yes. Sir. Marcus replied, my license is in my wallet, in my back right pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. With your permission, I'm going to reach for them. Barrett kept the light trained on Marcus. Go ahead. Slowly, as Marcus moved, Barrett's eyes swept the interior again. He noted Julian sitting stiffly in the passenger seat, his hands resting awkwardly on his knees. Barrett's internal narrative was already spinning a web of suspicion. Towman, dark vehicle, out-of-state plates, traveling late at night near the base. In Barrett's mind, he was already looking beyond the traffic stop, searching for the crime he was certain was hiding just out of sight. Marcus handed the documents through the window. Barrett took them, holding them under his flashlight. Whose vehicle is this? It's mine. Officer, Marcus said. Where are you boys coming from? Barrett asked. Shifting his stance slightly, leaning just a fraction of an inch closer to the window, the diner back up the road. Marcus answered, just grabbed some dinner. Diner closed an hour ago. Barrett countered, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into an interrogative rhythm. We were just in the parking lot making some phone calls before heading back. Marcus clarified, keeping his voice steady, refusing to take the bait of the officer's accusatory tone. Where are you heading, Barrett? Pressed back to base. Marcus said, I'm stationed there. Barrett looked at the military ID Marcus had handed over alongside his driver's license. He didn't acknowledge the rank of the service. Instead, his mind latched onto the discrepancy in his own timeline. They were lingering in a parking lot. Why to Barrett? Lingering meant casing, dealing or hiding. Sit tight, Barrett ordered. He turned and walked back to his cruiser, the red and blue lights continuing their manic rotation in the dark. Inside the SUV, Julian let out a breath. He seemed to have been holding for a minute. What was that about? Were you speeding? No, Marcus said quietly, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Just stay calm. Don't move your hands. Marcus knew the routine. He knew that as a black man in a civilian vehicle at night, the uniform he wore during the day offered no immediate armor against the assumptions of the man currently running his plates. He trusted his own ability to de-escalate, to remain perfectly compliant, relying on his training to guide them through the interaction. Back in the cruiser, Barrett ran the plates. The return was clear. The vehicle was registered to Marcus Hayes. No warrants, no flags, no criminal history. The initial justification for the stop, which Barrett would later claim was a partially obscured license plate due to road mud, had been addressed legally. At this precise moment, the purpose of the traffic stop had been fulfilled under the Fourth Amendment, specifically the precedent set by Rodriguez v. United States. A police officer may not prolong a routine traffic stop to conduct a separate investigation unless they have reasonable, articulable suspicion of an additional crime. Barrett had no such suspicion. He had no evidence of drugs, no evidence of alcohol, no evidence of a weapon. He had only his gut on amorphous. legally useless feeling that these two men did not belong. But Chief Barrett was not a man who let the rigid boundaries of case law dictate his actions on a dark country road. He clicked his radio. Dispatch, County Unit 3. I've got two individuals here. Plates come back clean, but they're acting nervous, lingering around the diner parking lot. I'm going to dig a little deeper. He stepped out of the cruiser again, leaving the citation book on his dashboard. He walked back to the SUV. The heavy crunch of his boots signaling his return. He stopped just behind the driver's side pillar, a tactical position, and leaned in. Mr. Hayes, Barrett said, deliberately omitting Marcus's military title, "Are there any weapons in the vehicle?" "Yes, officer," Marcus said immediately. "Knowing the law required disclosure, I have a concealed carry permit, which I handed you with my license. My personal registered firearm is unloaded and locked in a lockbox in the rear cargo area. There are no weapons in the cabin." Barrett's posture shifted instantly. The mere mention of a firearm, even a legally stowed and declared one, provided him with the pretext he was looking for. He manufactured a sudden sense of urgency, a tactical escalation that was entirely unwarranted by Marcus's calm demeanor. "All right, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," Barrett ordered, his voice suddenly sharp. His hand dropping to rest near the holster of his service weapon. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second. He knew his rights. He knew that under Pennsylvania v. Satin, Mims, an officer can order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop for officer safety. But he also knew this stop was no longer about a dirty license plate. "Officer, is there a problem? My weapon is locked in the back. Step out of the vehicle now, or you will be removed from the vehicle." Barrett barked, the tension in the air snapping tight like a coiled spring. "I'm stepping out," Marcus said, keeping his hands clearly visible as he unbuckled his seatbelt with agonizing slowness. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the freezing night air. He stood tall, towering slightly over Barrett, but immediately slouched his shoulders, instinctively trying to make himself appear less threatening. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Put your hands behind your back," Barrett commanded. Marcus complied, placing his hands behind his back. He felt the cold, unforgiving steel of handcuffs snap violently around his wrist, the teeth ratcheting tightly into his skin. "Officer, I am not resisting," Marcus said, his voice tight but controlled. "Why am I being placed in handcuffs? Officer, safety." Barrett grunted as he checked the tightness of the cuffs. "You have a weapon in the car. The weapon is locked in the trunk. I am in full compliance," Marcus stated, the humiliation washing over him as he stood cuffed on the side of the road, the flashing lights illuminating him for any passing cars to see. Barrett walked around to the passenger side and ordered Julian out. Julian, visibly shaking, complied. He was searched, patted down roughly, and told to sit on the damp grass of the shoulder. Barrett then proceeded to open the doors of the SUV without asking for consent and without probable cause. He began to visually sweep the interior, moving items around on the seats, shining his light under the floorboards. "Am I being detained?" Officer Marcus called out from the back of the SUV, his voice cutting through the damp air. Barrett ignored him, continuing his search. He was fishing. He was looking for a stray pill, a faint odor of marijuana, a loose bullet, anything that would retroactively justify the constitutional violation he was currently committing. For 20 minutes, the two men sat in the freezing cold. Marcus's wrists were throbbing, the metal biting into his skin. He watched Julian shivering on the ground. The physical discomfort was secondary to the profound sense of powerlessness. Marcus was a man who commanded troops, who understood the delicate balance of authority and respect. and he was watching a man with a badge dismantle his civil rights based on nothing more than a biased assumption. After 30 minutes of finding absolutely nothing, Barrett slammed the doors of the SUV shut. He walked back over to Marcus, his expression unreadable in the dark. He unlocked the handcuffs, pulling them off with a rough tug. "You need to get that license plate cleaned off," Barrett said, offering no apology, no explanation, and no citation. "Drive safe." Barrett turned, walked back to his cruiser, and drove away, leaving Marcus and Julian standing on the side of the dark highway. The entire encounter had yielded no ticket, no warning, and no arrest. It had been an exercise in intimidation, a demonstration of raw power unchecked by procedural law. The drive back to the base was conducted in absolute silence. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the deep, heavy breaths of two men trying to process the violation they had just endured. But Marcus Hayes was not a man who allowed systems to fail without consequence. He understood that what had happened on that dark road was not a misunderstanding. It was a civil rights violation. The next morning, Marcus filed a formal complaint with the town's police department, detailing the exact duration of the stop, the lack of reasonable suspicion, and the unconstitutional search and seizure. The town, as small towns often do when protecting their own, closed ranks. An internal review concluded within 2 weeks, stating that Chief Barrett had acted within departmental policy and that the detention was a standard officer safety protocol. Marcus hired a civil rights attorney. A federal lawsuit was filed under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleging the deprivation of constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. The town's lawyers fought back aggressively, filing motions to dismiss, claiming qualified immunity for Chief Barrett. They argued that the totality of the circumstances, the dark night, the proximity to a high crime area, the presence of a firearm justified the prolonged detention and the use of handcuffs. The case seemed destined to become a protracted, grueling battle of he said, heavily weighted in favor of the badge. Then came the turning point. During the discovery phase of the lawsuit, Marcus's attorney subpoenaed all dispatch logs, radio communications, dash cam footage, and body cam footage from the night of the incident. The town turned over the footage, confident it merely showed a routine, albeitinse, traffic stop, but they had overlooked the technological nuances of Chief Barrett's body camera. The camera system Barrett wore featured a pre-event buffer. This meant that while the camera only started permanently recording audio and video when the officer pressed the activation button, it continuously captured the preceding 30 seconds of video and, crucially, a hot microphone feed that ran continuously through the squad car's internal system in a brightly lit, sterile deposition room in a downtown law office. Marcus sat beside his attorney across from Chief Barrett and the town's legal counsel. The air was thick with the quiet hum of the HVAC system. Marcus's attorney, a sharp, meticulous woman named Sarah Jenkins, loaded a video file onto a large monitor at the end of the table. Chief Barrett, Jenkins said smoothly, "You testified earlier today that you pulled Captain Hayes over because his license plate was obscured by mud. Correct? That is correct." Barrett said, his posture rigid, his face a mask of practiced indifference. "And you testified that you prolonged the stop, ordered him out of the car, and placed him in handcuffs because he mentioned a firearm, which made you fear for your safety." "Yes." "Standard procedure," Barrett replied. Jenkins clicked her mouse. "I'd like to play Exhibit C. This is the unredacted audio feed from your vehicle's dash system, synced with the Bodycam pre-buffer exactly 45 seconds before you activated your emergency lights. The room filled with the static-laced sound of the cruiser's interior. The video showed the dark road, the taillights of Marcus's SUV. In the distance, then, Barrett's voice echoed from the speakers, clear as a bell. speaking to himself in the empty cruiser. Look at this. Out-of-state plates, dark windows. Coming from the diner, there was a pause, the sound of the cruiser accelerating, probably a couple of boys from the base running something across county lines. Look at them. They just don't fit the picture out here. I'm going to light them up and see what shakes loose. I can always find a dirty tag. The silence in the deposition room was absolute. The sound of a chair shifting felt like a gunshot. Barrett's face drained of color. He stared at the monitor, his jaw tight. Jenkins didn't stop there. Furthermore, Chief Barrett, we subpoenaed the dispatch logs for that evening. You claimed in your police report that there was a bulletin regarding a vandalism suspect in the area. We found the dispatch audio. She clicked another file. The voice of the dispatcher rang out. All units be advised. Report of property damage at the Rusty Spoon Diner. Suspect vehicle is described as an early 2000 silver sedan. Loud exhaust. Occupied by a single white male. Jenkins folded her hands on the table. Chief Barrett, my client was driving a 2021 dark blue SUV. He was accompanied by a passenger. Neither of them are white. The dispatch description did not match in make, model, color, year, or occupant description. You ignored the actual suspect profile because you had already decided, based on your own internal assumptions, that my client was the threat. You manufactured a traffic violation to effectuate a stop, and when the law required you to let them go, you manufactured a safety threat to illegally detain and humiliate them. There was no exaggerated drama. There was no shouting. The absolute crushing weight of the evidence spoke for itself. The procedural mistakes were laid bare, entirely stripped of the officer safety shield. Barrett had not made a mistake in the heat of the moment. He had executed a deliberate circumvention of the Fourth Amendment based on an insidious, unspoken bias that dictated who belonged in his town and who did not. The consequences were swift. Though devoid of the immediate cinematic justice people often crave, the town's insurance carrier, seeing the indefensible nature of the Bodycam audio and the blatant constitutional violations, refused to take the case to trial. They forced the town into a settlement. The judge, upon reviewing the summary judgment motions, issued a scathing written opinion regarding the department's blatant disregard for Rodriguez v. United States and the unconstitutional use of handcuffs during a routine stop without reasonable suspicion of danger. The city was ordered to pay a substantial financial settlement for civil rights violations and emotional distress. Chief Barrett was not fired in a dramatic public spectacle. Instead, the town council, terrified of further liability and public relations nightmares, quietly offered him an ultimatum. 2 weeks later, Barrett submitted his resignation, taking an early retirement. He faded away, stripped of his badge and the unyielding authority he had wielded so carelessly on that dark road. The town was forced to implement mandatory state-supervised training on implicit bias and constitutional search and seizure protocols. Marcus Hayes took the settlement and set up a scholarship fund for minority law students. He continued his military career, a quiet, disciplined professional, but the invisible scars of that night lingered. Every time a police cruiser pulled behind him in traffic, he felt a phantom tightening around his wrists, a physiological reminder that compliance, rank, and innocence are not always enough to protect you from the assumptions of a man with a badge. When a community grants law enforcement the extraordinary power to detain, to search, and to deprive an individual of their liberty, that power must be tethered strictly to facts and the law, never to assumptions or gut feelings. The moment the law becomes subjective, it ceases to be justice and becomes oppression. If a decorated military officer, perfectly compliant and entirely innocent, can be stripped of his dignity and constitutional rights on the side of a road simply because he didn't fit the picture, then what protection does the law truly offer to anyone else